The wind howled down from the Pyrenees, sharp enough to cut through wool. Toma, a medieval shepherd in his early 40s, stood outside his grass hut, breath turning into ghostly clouds in the fog. His sun-tanned skin was cracked from years in the mountain air, his angular face half hidden by a thin black beard. The heavy woolen cloak in dark brown hung over a rough linen tunic cinched with a leather belt. In one hand, his trusty wooden staff. In the other, the weight of another brutal winter night. He stepped inside slowly, boots crunching on frozen straw, knowing this hut was his front-line trench against hypothermia. The cold here didn't play around. It didn't knock, it kicked the door in. Tomas smirked under his breath. If this keeps up, the whole flock's gonna learn to sleep packed tighter than sardines. The Pyrenees in winter doesn't just get cold, it turns into a slow-moving predator. The wind slides down the slopes like icy knives looking for a way into Toma's grass hut. And hut here, think less cozy cabin and more giant haystack. Someone decided to live in bent wooden poles covered in thick dried grass. The roof sloping so low, you've got to duck to get in. Inside, the air bites almost as hard as outside. No switch to flip, no central heating hum. Just straw, underfoot a couple of worn animal hides and survival habits forged over decades. Out here, one mistake, a gap in the grass, a loose patch on the roof, and the cold will pour in like water through a cracked boat. And before you say, "I've camped in the snow," I'd be fine. Your tent had zippers, insulation, maybe even a propane heater. Toma's gear, whatever the pasture offers before the snow swallows it whole. Your move. Could you make it to morning in here? From the outside, Toma's hut looks like it grew out of the mountain itself. A low, rounded mound of grass, weather-stained and rimmed with frost. Up close, you can see the handwork. Each bundle of dried grass tied and layered thick enough to break the wind, but never truly keeping the cold out. Inside, it's cramped. You can't stand straight. The walls curve in smelling of hay and smoke from old fires. The floor, just hard, frozen earth. Until Toma changes that. Because in here, every inch counts, and the ground itself can decide if you wake up warm or not at all. Step inside Toma's hut, and the first thing you notice after the smell of hay and old smoke is the floor. Hard, frozen earth. The kind of cold that seeps through your boots, climbs up your legs, and settles in your bones. In the mountains, they call it the ground bite. And trust me, if you sleep on it, it will chew right through you. That's why Toma doesn't. He grabs armfuls of dry straw, thick, springy, and full of air pockets, and spreads it in a thick layer across the floor. He stomps it down not just to make it flat, but to lock those little air gaps in place. That's insulation medieval style. No foam pads, no mylar blankets, just grass arranged so it traps heat the way your puffy jacket traps air. On top of that, he rolls out his prized possession, a huge sheepskin worn and yellowed from years of use. This isn't some tourist souvenir, it's his portable mattress, his thermal barrier, and in a pinch, his blanket. Wool fibers still lock in warmth, even when damp modern science proves it. Toma just knows it because it's kept him alive winter after winter. Meanwhile, in the modern world, most of us freak out if our heated mattress pad stops working. Out here, the heated mattress is a sheep that's been gone for years, but still doing its job. So here's your challenge. Strip away the tech, the gadgets, the comfort. Just you, a frozen floor, and whatever the land gives you. How would you insulate your bed if you had to survive till morning? Drop your answer below. I'm curious if you'd think like on the coldest nights, Toma doesn't sleep alone. He turns his little grass hut into what I can only describe as a wool-powered survival chamber. He brings in 3 or 4 young sheep small enough to fit inside, but big enough to act like living space heaters. No power cords, no Wi-Fi, just 100% off-grid renewable sheep energy. Inside that cramped hut space is precious. The walls aren't even real walls, just thick bundles of dried grass tied and layered to block the wind. But the wind still finds a way in. So the only real heat source is whatever you can trap between bodies, blankets, and dirt. Sheep have an advantage here. Each one radiates roughly 100 watts of heat, about the same as a bright incandescent bulb. Get 4 of them in close, and you've basically got a 400-watt heater lying right next to you. It's biology's version of a generator-warm portable and occasionally noisy. Modern survival manuals call this shared body heat. Shepherds just call it common sense. And it works. The air inside the hut rises just enough so your breath doesn't freeze in your beard. Your muscles stop shivering. Your brain slows down just enough to let you drift off. Though never completely. Because, well, you're sharing a bed with livestock. Of course there's a catch. You might wake up to the gentle sound of bleeding, or to a hoof planted squarely in your ribs. And let's not talk about the barnyard aroma that tends to linger until well after sunrise. Meanwhile, back in our modern thermostat-controlled lives, we complain if our bed partner steals the blanket. Out here, Toma is grateful if his bed partner bleats drools and takes up half the sleeping space. It means they're still alive. And so is he. So here's my question. If it meant surviving the night in freezing mountain air, could you share your sleeping bag with a farm animal, or would you freeze out of pride? Let me know in the comments. And no, your golden retriever doesn't count. Now let's talk about Toma's final defense against the Pyrenees cold, his survival blanket system. Forget the sleek, ultralight sleeping bags we can buy today. Toma's gear comes straight from the field, literally. He wraps himself in layers of animal hides, thick sheep pelts for bulk, goat hides for toughness, and patched together scraps of rabbit fur for, well, whatever's left over. Once he's fully wrapped, he doesn't just lie down. He cocoons. Think of a medieval burrito. Or, better yet, a sleeping bag made entirely out of farm animals. He leaves just a tiny gap near his mouth to breathe because the rest is sealed tight. Heat loss minimal. Mobility zero. If someone attacked in the night, his best move would be rolling away like a log. There's actual science behind this. Animal hides are nature's insulation-dense fibers that trap warm air, just like modern synthetic fill. A well-cured sheepskin can keep you warm. Even stack enough of them, and you're essentially wearing a portable, multi-layered microclimate. The downside weight. His blanket probably weighs as much as a small sheep. The downside weight. His blanket probably weighs as much as a small sheep, but it's a trade-off for warmth. In today's world, we call it layering and buy expensive gear with brand logos. Back then, layering meant whatever you could sew patch or drag into the hut before sundown. And while we might complain about how scratchy wool sweaters feel, Toma sleeps with goat hide pressed against his chin and calls it luxury. By the time he's tucked in, the wind outside could scream all it wants. Inside that bundle, Toma's heartbeat slows, his breathing evens out, and the cold becomes something distant, like a memory. At least, until morning when he has to break free from the fur cocoon. So tell me, if you had to survive a mountain winter without modern gear, would you wrap up like a medieval burrito or risk it with just a blanket from home? Drop your answer below. And bonus points if you've actually tried sleeping under real animal hides. Toma has one more trick up his sleeve, or more accurately, under his blanket. Before turning in for the night, he goes outside to the small fire pit just beside his grass hut. There, he picks out a few round river stones, smooth enough to handle, but heavy enough to hold heat. He buries them in the glowing embers, waits until they're almost too hot to touch, then carefully wraps each one in thick linen. These aren't just rocks anymore, they're medieval hot water bottles. No leaks, no rubber, no screw caps. Once placed at the foot of his bedroll, they radiate a slow, steady warmth that lasts for hours, keeping his feet from turning into blocks of ice. There's a bit of physics at work here. Stone has a high specific heat capacity, meaning it can store a large amount of thermal energy and release it gradually. In modern camping, we'd call this thermal mass heating. Back then, it was just what you did if you didn't want frostbite. Of course, there's a fine line between comfort and disaster. Get the timing wrong, and you'll scorch a hole through your blanket or your toes. Shepherds learned the trick by trial and error, which in this case might have meant limping through the snow for a week. Compared to today's world, where we flick on an electric blanket with a remote, Toma's method feels primitive, but it's incredibly efficient. Zero energy bill, zero maintenance, and the only moving part is you carrying the stones inside. I have to admit, there's something appealing about it. The glow from the fire, the weight of the stone in your hands, the way it pushes back against the cold. It's simple, tangible, and just works. So here's my challenge for you next time you're camping in the cold skip, the battery-powered gadgets. Heat a couple of stones by the fire, wrap them up, and see how well you sleep. Just maybe keep a safe distance from your toes, unless you're into that kind of wake-up call. By the time the wind starts howling down from the peaks, Toma knows it's time for the final step, windproofing the hut. And remember, his walls aren't like ours. There's no drywall, no insulation panels, no triple-glazed windows, just bundles of dry grass tied together, woven tight, but still full of tiny gaps that cold air loves to sneak through. So he takes armfuls of loose straw and pushes it deep into every crevice he can find. Then comes the scrap cloth, old tunics, worn-out sacks, anything that can plug a draft. This isn't about beauty, it's about survival. The outside may still be the Pyrenees winter, but inside he's building a bubble of still air. Next, the doorway. No hinges, no fitted door frame, just an opening where the wind could blast straight through. His fix a rough wooden plank wedged across the front, acting as a shield. It doesn't seal perfectly, but it slows the wind enough to give his fire a fighting chance. Here's the science: wind chill can make a cold night deadly. Even a small draft can drop the temperature inside by several degrees. By blocking airflow, Toma isn't just stopping the wind, he's keeping the warm air he worked so hard to trap from escaping. Modern campers have tent zippers, thermal liners, and snow skirts. Back then, your zippers were handfuls of straw, and your insulation came from whatever you could stuff into a hole. And sure, you could leave a gap for ventilation, but too much, and you'd be an icicle by morning. It's funny, today we might fuss over home decor, matching curtains to the couch. Toma's interior design was simple. If it blocks the wind, it stays, even if it's an old goat sack hanging in the doorway. So let's hear it. Have you ever camped in a way where you had to improvise windproofing? What's the weirdest thing you've stuffed into a gap to stay warm? Share your best Toma-style fixes in the outside. The wind still roars like a freight train tearing through the valley. But inside Toma's little grass hut, it's a different world, barely warmer, sure, but just enough to keep the frost from claiming him. The heat from the straw, the furs, the sheep, and those slow-cooling stones merges into a fragile pocket of safety. He lies still, wrapped so tightly he could be mistaken for a rolled-up carpet. Eyes half shut, breath slow, wooden staff clutched across his chest, not because he expects an intruder, but because habit is hard to kill. Out here, readiness is survival. Here's the thing. Modern folks think warm means 70 degrees on the thermostat. For Toma, warm means my toes still move in the morning. He's not toasty. He's not comfortable. He's simply alive. And in the medieval Pyrenees, that's a win. Every creak of the hut's grass walls makes him wonder if a gust will tear it open. Every shift from the sheep beside him changes the temperature by a hair. He's learned to sense these things the way you might notice your phone's battery dropping too fast. Science tells us that when you're in a cold environment, microclimates, tiny zones of warmer air, are the key. Toma's entire night depends on maintaining one the size of a small bed. Break it, and the cold floods in like water through a hole in a boat. It's a strange kind of peace, fragile, temporary, but fought for. And if you've ever been winter camping, you know that moment when you're not warm enough to relax, but not cold enough to panic. That's exactly where Toma lives tonight. So here's my question. What's the coldest night you've ever spent outdoors, and what trick kept you going? Drop your I survived stories in the comments. Toma would approve.
You must have been terrified.
More than you know.
Morning comes slow in the Pyrenees. The first light seeps through the grass walls, painting Toma's hut in pale gold. He pushes himself up, joints stiff, back sore, but alive. That's the metric out here. Not comfort, survival. He steps outside, staff and hand boots crunching over frost-hardened ground. The valley is silent except for the wind and the faint bleating of his sheep. In a world without thermostats, without heated blankets, he's just passed another night, the way his ancestors did: one layer of straw, one layer of fur, one trick at a time. And here's the kicker. Most of us complain when our Wi-Fi drops for 5 minutes. Toma's biggest inconvenience was maybe getting stepped on by a sheep in the middle of the night. Perspective, right? If there's a takeaway, it's this: survival isn't always dramatic. It's habit. It's knowing a dozen tiny tricks and stacking them together until the odds tilt your way. Toma doesn't think of himself as a survival expert. He's just a shepherd who refused to freeze. So now I'm curious, if you had to spend one night in a grass hut like Toma with no modern gear, what's the one item you'd bring? Tell me in the comments. I want to see who's thinking practical and who's thinking about snacks.